Hello, class. We're in week 4, and we will begin our lectures on the book of Revelation. And so, weeks 4, 5, 6, and 7 will cover lectures in the book of Revelation. And we'll cover all the chapters. So, let's begin. We'll look at the introductory material and we'll look at the authorship first of all. The early church fathers accepted the apostolic authorship of the book of Revelation as being John the apostle. The author identifies himself to be John in the very first verse of the first chapter. However, Dionysius of Alexandria, he was a bishop in Alexandria, Egypt, who was the bishop there from AD 247 to 264, questioned John as being the author. And Dionysius based his view on the different style of writing there of the book of Revelation from John's other writings, like in the Gospel of John and the 3 epistles. So now, today, it is understood that the genre of apocalyptic, prophetic language in certain books of the Bible, literature, has a different style than other genres. That is, the Gospels have a different genre, or the epistles may have a different genre, and they understand that now. But they did not. Dionysius, back in 247 to 264 AD, was questioning the authorship. But the differences in style of the book of Revelation from John's other writings does not disprove that he was the author. Dionysius' influence caused the church to delay the acceptance of the book of Revelation into the New Testament canon. The church, the early church fathers, they did not determine the canon. They were just recognizing which writings were heretical and which writings were divinely inspired. It took a delay because of Dionysius had questioned the authorship. The Western Church in the 4th century accepted the book of Revelation into the New Testament canon, and later the Eastern Church did in the 7th century. So they both eventually came to the same conclusion. Now we'll look at the date of writing and where. So it's thought to be around 95 or 96 AD. And so let's see what kind of evidence we have that would support such a dating. And this would be the latest of all writings of the New Testament, of any of the books. So let's look at the evidence. Most evangelical scholars affirm that the book of Revelation was written around this time. It's based on accounts of the early church fathers that the apostle John had to be exiled on Patmos Island during the reign of Domitian. Domitian was a Roman emperor who died in AD 96. After Domitian's death, John was allowed to return to Ephesus. And so the early church fathers and the early church knew this. This was something they knew in those days. Also, we see in the second bullet, some believe Revelation was written between AD 64 to 68 during Nero's reign. If this were true, I don't agree with them, but if it were, then much of the prophecy would have been written before the destruction of the temple in AD 70. And those who advocate such an early date before the destruction of the temple want to look for dates because their idea of prophecy would make it coincide with their prophetic predictions of eschatology. And then we see here the third bullet of evidence. Domitian, that's the Roman emperor, time frame is preferable for the following reasons. So why would it be more preferable than the 64, 68 during Nero's reign? Well, let's look. It would allow time for the 7 churches to whom it was addressed, Revelations chapter 2 and 3, the seven churches of Asia Minor to default. In the early 60s, if you look at AD 64, 68, one does not see much spiritual deterioration among the churches of Asia Minor. Particularly if you look at a lot of Pauline epistles. There were some, of course. That's why he wrote, some of the reasons he wrote was there was some creeping into churches, some false teachers. But there were some, for sure. John came into Asia Minor after the time of Paul. And so Paul had been crucified before in the 60s. And so around Nero's reign. And so John came into Asia Minor after this. The Neronic dating does not allow enough time for John to have become the leader in Asia Minor over Paul. So that doesn't fit either. So that's two reasons. And thirdly, a rebuilt Laodicea, that's one of the seven churches mentioned, and this is mentioned in Revelation chapter 3, verses 14, 19. A rebuilt Laodicea better fits the later date, since Laodicea was destroyed by a volcano in AD 60. All right, so these things support a later dating. So we see the addressees. Who was it written to? Well, we kind of just mentioned that the seven churches of Asia Minor, as stated in verse 4 of chapter 1. There were other cities there too in Asia Minor, in which there were churches such as Colossae, Troas, and Hierapolis. Why did the Apostle John write to these particular seven churches of Asia Minor? And the answer is probably because these seven churches were in a strategic location, being on a circular road that bound together the most populous, wealthy, and influential part of the province, the west central region. So therefore, they could circulate these writings of the apostles, to one church, and they would send it to another one, and it could circulate. So here we see the addressees to those particular seven churches, but also it's also for all believers of all time. Remember, the believers comprise the body of Christ, which is the church. That's the universal church. And then here we got different approaches to interpreting the book of Revelation. Let's look at the preterist approach. It's called a hermeneutical approach. That means how the methods that the preterists would use to interpret the book of Revelation. So let's look at the preterists first. The word preterist is from a Latin word that means past. Thus, the preterist interpreters are those who see Revelation as having already been fulfilled in the early centuries of the church. They would see chapters 5 through 11 are said to record the church's victory over Judaism. Chapters 12 through 19, her victory over pagan Rome, and chapters 20 through 22, her glory because of these victories. The persecutions described are those of Nero and Domitian, and the entire book was fulfilled by the time of Constantine, they say in AD 312. And that would be the preterist approach, which that's not mine. But that's would be like what's called dominion theology, or we would say postmillennialism. They would believe, or amillennialism as well, that everything's already fulfilled. It's not a futuristic prophecy yet to be filled at the end of time. It was fulfilled in 70 AD. When the church in Jerusalem was destroyed. That would be the church's victory over Judaism, I suppose. Anyway, I don't agree with that approach, but that's neither here nor there. I just wanted you to be aware there are different ways to interpret it, and this is one of them. Another one is the historical. States that the Revelation there is a panorama of the history of the church from the days of John to the end of the age. it holds that the book has been in the process of being fulfilled throughout the whole Christian era. Those who hold to this view see in the symbols the rise of the papacy, the corruption of the church, and various wars throughout church history. Most of the reformers after the Reformation interpret the book in this manner, but everyone's interpretation within this viewpoint is a scheme of its own, so that's not totally one scheme. So that would be their view. The idealist. This approach sees in Revelation a pictorial unfolding of great principles in constant conflict. The book does not record actual events that have been fulfilled or that are going to happen. Rather, it portrays the age-long struggle between good and evil. This viewpoint spiritualizes and allegorizes the text. So when we say spiritualize or allegorize, it means they look for a non-literal meaning. Their methods are to find a meaning other than what the text literally says and in the context of the times. So that's their approach. And then the futurist approach, which I would agree with. This approach sees the events recorded in chapters 4 through 22 as happening in the future. It's a futuristic approach, that a prophecy of the distant future. This approach follows a normal, literal interpretation. If you just read the Bible and take it literally. All four views recognize the presence of symbols in the book, including the futurist, but the futurist sees the symbols conveying a plain meaning. That's symbolic of something that they refer to, that means something and refer to something, those symbols that have meaning. The futurists do not claim to be able to explain every detail with certainty. Well, I don't see how anybody could claim that. But they do insist that the principle of a literal interpretation or plain, just take the Bible as it, as you read it, like you would any other book, be followed consistently. Futurists recognize that John used the words like or as, and what is called a figure of speech means simile, similar to something, like or as. And you'll see that a lot in the book because John is trying to describe what he's seeing to the reader, and he'll try to use something that the reader might be familiar with so he can give an analogy of what it's like that. Or, that's why he would say it's similar to this. And he's trying to describe something so the reader can put it in something he can understand. That's why John would use that, to describe something that that John saw or heard, that was revealed to him by the Spirit. But when he does not use these words, that is John, we are to understand that whatever he is describing is exactly what he saw or heard. So let's look at the structure of the book of Revelation. It's structured into three distinct sections, and we see that very clearly in verse 19 of chapter 1. And I got it here. We can read it. John writes, therefore, and this is what John was being instructed to do. This is what his command. He's being commanded to write. Therefore, write the things which you have seen, John, and the things which are, and the things which will take place after these things. So you see three sections. The things you have seen was verses 1 through 18 in chapter 1. The things which are and the things which will take place are two more sections. And so let's look at the things you've seen. This section will include the introduction to the book and John's vision of the glorified Lord who appeared to him on the Isle of Patmos in chapter 1 up to here. Therefore, in light of what you just saw, the things which are. This section contains the 7 letters to the 7 churches of Asia Minor, so it was written to, which are judged by the Lord, and that we see in chapters 2 and 3. Those are the things which are. So that's here you got chapter 1 and chapter 2 and 3. So that's two sections. Then you got a third section, and the things which will, that's a future tense, will take place after these things, after the church, in other words. This section includes all the events which will take place from the rapture of the church to eternity future. And that's chapters 4 through 22. Chapters 4 and 5 are really a throne vision where John is called up into heaven and sees a vision of the throne in heaven. But let's look at underneath these sub-bullets. What are some of the things which will occur in the future? The tribulation period on earth with the simultaneous events in heaven. Another one, the coming of the Lord in glory. So when he comes back the second time, it will be in glory. Now that's the suffering servant who came to redeem us by dying on the cross the first time. We also see what will take place, the millennial reign of Christ, the messianic reign of Christ on the earth for 1,000 years. That's what millennium means. The last revolt of Satan after this 1,000-year reign of Christ. The great white throne judgment after the reign of that millennial reign, where the devil and all those he led to follow him to rebel against God are cast into the lake of fire. And then we see the eternal state. So the eternal state, a new heaven, a new earth. Now, let's look at the prologue, the outline. And this is the last slide in this lecture. After this introduction and after this slide, there'll be further lectures. We'll start picking up with chapter 1 in our next recorded lecture. But this is closing out this one. This is the outline. So we see the prologue, first 8 verses, the things you have seen, 9 through 20, the things which are, chapter 2 and 3, the things which will take place after these things. We all saw the outline of it in chapter 1, verse 18 or 19. And the throne vision, the tribulation, the millennium, and then we see the eternal state, and then the epilogue. And so that would conclude the lecture on the introductory material.